Good morning from New York City, and a very warm welcome to all our viewers around the world. My name is Sunny Misser, and I will be your host in today's panel discussion about the role of the CSO. Let me begin by first thanking our sponsors and our hosts for this wonderful event. I'll start off with thanking my good friend and the chairperson of this session, Dr. Peter Easton, who also is the chair of the overall conference, Accountability in a Sustainable World. The Center for Accounting Research and Education at the University of Notre Dame, the Climate Action Group, the United Nations Environmental Program Finance Initiative, and of course, the Sustainable Investment Forum of North America. Now, with that out of the way, I would love to begin introducing our panel, but there is a little challenge here. If I truly start giving you the backgrounds and experiences of this rich and rather good-looking panel that I have with me today, it would take me half this session. So rather than being entrusted with that difficult task, the way we're going to begin today's session is by inviting the panelists in alphabetical order to tell you a little bit about themselves. They will do that for about 2 minutes, and then we jump right into the session. As you know, that our panelists come from very diverse backgrounds. They're all C-suite officers with the titles of heads of ESG or ESG leaders or chief sustainability officers. But they got there in very, very different ways. So without further ado, I warmly welcome all three of you, and I have the privilege of calling you my friends. Okay? I've known you for a long period of time, and I'm absolutely amazed at the success that you have had in your respective careers. In alphabetical order, from a very early morning at the recording on the West Coast, I will start with Noel Kinder. And all the trophies that you see on Noel's mantle are both real, and they each have a story. But that's the topic for a separate panel discussion. Noel, over to you. You're on panel.
Thanks, Sunny. Yeah, well, I would love to share the stories behind all of those things, but that is definitely another session in and of itself. My name's Noel Kinder. I recently retired from nearly 25 years at Nike. My last role there was Chief Sustainability Officer. And as you said, some of us have a very long and winding road. Landing in that seat, mine was indeed long and winding. In fact, I like to refer to myself as a bit of a mutt from a career standpoint. Prior to CSO, I led the responsible supply chain team at Nike. I spent 3 years in Vietnam as the general manager for manufacturing there, led the apparel sourcing and supply planning function, amongst a number of other roles in finance, strategic planning, and started my career at Nike in product quality, of all things, in 1999. So a checkered history, to say the least.
Now, that's wonderful, and I'm sure there is a lot to draw upon in terms of your background and experience, Noel, that we're going to tap into this session. Because when you look at 2.5 decades with Nike, in many ways Nike has been pioneers amongst the pioneers in the footwear and the apparel industry in terms of pushing the ESG agenda forward. So there's wonderful material to draw from. Next, in alphabetical order, I have Amy Springsteel, who is sitting in a very impressive conference room at the Bloomberg headquarters, not far from mine. There she is. And, obviously, we just like Carmen and Amy and Noel and I, we go back a while. But Amy, could you please tell us about yourself?
I'm happy to. And you might be starting to hear a bit of a pattern because my background is similar in that I'm a mutt as well and had many different careers before I got to sustainability. And I think you'll find that with most people who've been in it for a while. There didn't used to be a chief sustainability officer role. There wasn't even large teams. There weren't even small teams. There was teams of one when I started way back when. So I think you'll probably find that as you listen to more panels with folks who have the experience in this area. So I currently am the Chief Sustainability Officer for Bloomberg LP. And I've developed a skill set and a bit of a reputation for helping financial services companies develop their sustainability groups and sustainability departments. So I've had 15 plus years doing that. Prior to that, I was all over the place. I did some consulting. I was doing marketing. I was out on my own as an entrepreneur. And interestingly, I started out my initial career years and years ago as a teacher. So it's interesting to come to sustainability with the background that I have. All of those experiences, understanding marketing, understanding consulting, how to be an advisor to folks, how to be an outsider, but behave like an insider, how to understand the context with which people come to the table, which is what you're taught when you're a teacher about your students, all come together to help me develop this career.
Thank you, Amy. And I'm sure our viewers want to know about the different pit stops along the way, from teacher to consultant to chief sustainability officer. With that in mind, I would also like to introduce Carmen Villar, and we're going to talk about her transition because, working in a public sector and then moving to a private sector and not missing a beat has been the hallmark of Carmen's career. And with that, and we're going to definitely talk about that because when you talk about Carmen's bosses, which is the topic of another question, you will be quite surprised to hear some of those names. But Carmen, please, over to you.
Sure. Hi, Sunny, and hi, everyone. It's great to be with you here today. Like Sunny said, I'm Carmen Villar. I'm the Vice President at Gilead Sciences. I'm the ESG leader there. And I have just joined the company about 9 months ago. Prior to that, I did a very similar role at Merck, or MSD as it's known outside of the United States. And really integrating the activities of what I would say is a responsible company. So as a healthcare company, doing a lot of work around health equity, access to health, thinking about our sustainability portfolio and how we report out on those metrics, but giving me a wide variety of things to do, much like my career, as Sunil has mentioned, because prior to that, I was in the public sector working for the U.S. government for a very long time at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, where I had the opportunity to work in many different disease areas with many different people, politicians, leaders, etc. And I also had the opportunity to live and work in Africa, working on PEPFAR, or the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. So quite much like ESG and our world, quite a diverse background, and happy to be with you here today to talk more about it.
Welcome, Carmen. Welcome. With this in mind, clearly one thing is apparent to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, to those who are listening in to this broadcast, that our panelists have come from very different pathways with very unique sets of experiences and backgrounds, and they're running what we call rather similar or shared portfolios. Now, my question is a much broader question. If we were to live in an industry agnostic world, right? Because everything is very specific, whether you're oil and gas or financial services or healthcare or media or manufacturing. If you were to, for a moment, take the industry hat out of this and look at the ideal mix of qualities and attributes that would make a great CSO or an ESG leader, what do you believe them to be? And what do you believe it was likely to be in the next 3 to 5 years, the role of the CSO? And this is an open question to anyone who'd like to start, and then please, the others, feel free to join in.
Well, I thought that Amy's point, about being a mutt is a really interesting one. And I'm sure Carmen, based on her career history, has a similar outlook. I think the diversity of experience, it really helps you drive change. At the end of the day, a CSO or an ESG leader is charged with transformation, but transformation within the context of the enterprise in which you're operating. And so obviously I'm biased given my history, but I really think that diversity of experience, particularly for me in the operational space, where so many of the levers exist to drive a more sustainable enterprise, were really important. So I think, at least one of the significant components of that skill set is operational experience, being in the guts of the business, understanding how the levers of change actually are operated. What are the different intersections of incentive between the sustainability agenda and what the enterprise is really trying to drive from an efficiency standpoint, from a profitability expansion standpoint, from a revenue growth standpoint. Those things all have to live together. So that would be my contribution, is that really having a depth of knowledge of how the business operates is a really important aspect of being an effective CSO.
I think that's a very fair point, and Noel, it's almost like you've stolen one of my questions, which I was going to ask, but I'm still going to ask that later. Carmen, Amy, any
Sure.
suggestions?
Sure.
Yeah,
I'll jump in after Carmen. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Amy. I was going to jump in on Noel's point, because I think I always say to anyone who asks me about career advice or anything else is that the best experience is to understand what's happening on the ground. So whether you're in a company where you go out to an affiliate and you see every day how they're coping with the stresses of whether it be production, marketing, manufacturing, whatever it is, and really being on the ground to see how things work, to understand those levers, as Noel said, and really understanding on a macro level how the business operates or how your environment works, because we're all in a little bit of a different situation here. So I think being able to helicopter up and see that big picture, while at the same time, as Noel said, understanding those levers. I guess the last thing I would say would be to operate with a little bit of humility. There's a lot we don't know, but we are responsible for, meaning bringing it all together under one umbrella for the company and being able to report that out in a responsible way.
Thank you, Carmen. I love the bit about humility, because it's very geographically focused. It's something that I hear much more when I'm talking to Asian CEOs or certain European CEOs, but not very much when we look at it in a U.S. context. So that's very helpful. Amy.
So maybe I'll take a little bit of a different tact. I agree with the humility, but at the same time, I feel like you have to own your seat at the table. Those of us who've been in this for a long time remember the days when people were like, oh, those sustainability people, they always come to me and ask me to do stuff. And and now it's a different story, thankfully. But at the same time, even when you're in that kind of a situation, because in some companies it's still like that, you have to come to the table with a strong conviction about the business value behind what you're bringing to the table is. And at the same time, you have to be comfortable with pushing the envelope a little bit, not accepting no for an answer, but also knowing when to pull back. So there's a little bit of a dance in terms of getting people through what might be uncomfortable or new and different without pushing them too hard where the door isn't open anymore. So those are some delicate skills, and a lot of that comes with experience. But you can also ask those of us who've been in it a while how to sort of play both sides in that way.
I mean, that's a very, very well put point, because the strong conviction, a lot of people can have strong conviction. And actually be willing to push the envelope and actually rip it if they have to. But it's that ability to show the necessary restraint that you're talking about, that emotional intelligence that comes with both experience, but also a certain kind of experience, is critical. We have talked about Carmen talking at the macro level and having ground knowledge. She is a photographer, being aware of what's going on at the ground. and Noel talking about operational experience and basically leading transformation. And Noel, I'm going to come back to your point because I've heard you say this in more than one of your talks about the intersections of incentive. Okay, and obviously not being as eloquent as you, I would just call it "What's in it for me," right? And you got to sell that "What's in it for me" all the time. Amy and I were catching up a little while ago, and she said, "Remember, Sonny, those early days, 10, 15 years ago, where we fought tooth and nail just to get a budget approved, just to get a little bit of money to spend." And obviously, the agenda and the field has come a long way since. Which brings me to my next question. Okay. Uh, through all of our board engagements, through our consulting work, and through our research in the corporate governance and the ESG area, we at AccountAbilit have noticed that there is a huge importance to the dynamic between the chief sustainability officer or the ESG leader and the CSO and the CEO. Because the CEO is responsible for setting the tone at the top. Now, if the tone at the top is not aligned to what the sustainability agenda ought to be, it becomes extremely challenging to push it forward. Now, when I discussed this question with you, Noel, a while ago, you also mentioned that it's not just the dynamic or relationship between the CEO and the CSO, but also the CSO of the board that matters. Okay, so with that question broadly in mind, I would love to ask you this question: how much does it matter, and how do you make it work? Okay, because and not to belabor this point, but Carmen has had, and I hope I'm allowed to say this on this broadcast, but Carmen has had to work with very big name CEOs who came with very large footprints. At the National Health Service, CDC, you work with Dr. Anthony Fauci, okay? And then when you came to Merck, you work with Mr. Ken Frazier. Both of these are not only giants in their field, but icons in individual fields. How do you do what Amy said? Go in with your strong conviction and push the envelope with someone like Dr. Fauci or Mr. Frazier. And Carmen, I'm going to throw this question at you. Sorry, it's a little bit of a curveball.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I was actually thinking about this while Amy was talking, because when you work in government, the incentives are very different, right? The monetary incentives are not what we see in the private sector for the most part. Everybody is sort of paid the same or at a tiered level, which is public knowledge. So everybody kind of knows what each other is making. The politics are what really drives a lot of what you do, the wins, losses, or successes. And I think that really forces you to master that dance that Amy was talking about. So I actually was Chief of Staff to Tom Frieden at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I had the opportunity to work with many people in the president's cabinet, including the Secretary of Health and people like Anthony Fauci at NIH during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And talk about a dance. Boy, that was really interesting, bringing all of these heads of agency or cabinet members together to really try to understand what was happening on the ground in another part of the world and what the real threat was to our country or to the U.S. And so that really forces you to exercise all of those things that we've been talking about. The humility, right? Because you're not this huge political person in charge, but also this ability to bring them along to see the point of view that you're trying to advocate for, and doing that in a way that's effective to get the intended result for those you're trying to serve, ultimately patients in this case, or clients and people, the public. So I think, with that, I was able to really bring those skills into the private sector when I moved to Merck and I had the opportunity to work with someone like Ken Frazier. I will say I've hesitated, though, because there is this view from both sides, I would say, the private and the public sector, that each side is different or not as good, or, there's this misunderstanding, I would say, between the sectors. So I did have a little bit of a hesitancy going into making that move after 20 years in the US government. And, um, when I got to Mr. Fraser's office, I said, Ken, I'm really not sure I even still want this job. And I'm a little bit hesitant to make the move across the aisle, so to say. And he said, Carmen, that's great. You can stay where you are in the US government. You can do what you've been doing. You can accomplish great things and serve the people and all of that. And that's fantastic. He said, or you can come work with us at Merck and you can bring all of the weight and the resources and the power behind this huge company to bear and still do good things and still act in a responsible way. And I will be there with you by your side. And that was the turning point in everything that I did. I thought all of these things I wanted to do in my career to do good had to be in a certain way, in a certain part of the sector, right? And in a certain world. But he really helped to show me that I could do good things. I could help companies behave in a responsible way. With a different kind of support system and a different lens that I found to be very, very helpful in that transition, but also as I continue to move forward.
Well, this is very, very helpful insight, Carmen, because getting that sort of a support system or validation from someone at the level of Ken Fraser could make all that difference, right? And clearly you acted upon it, and here we are. Which leads me to my other panelists, if they would like to jump in, because I'm sure they all have views on this.
I would just say, in terms of the CEO and the relationship with the CSO, it feels like it's great but the CEO doesn't have to be the face of sustainability for the company, but they do have to be the voice of it. And by that, I mean, it shouldn't all sit with the CEO. And oftentimes they're not necessarily versed in this area. So if you're feeding them talking points, it doesn't sound natural and real. When it comes to being the only one talking about sustainability, but the employee base is where you really have to garner your champions, and they'll start to talk about it honestly and with compassion and with conviction is the word I was thinking of. So I feel like the CEO should be supportive, should help guide the work, should ensure that the CSO has the resources he or she needs, but not necessarily has to be the face of it.
That is very helpful. You make the distinction between the face and the voice. The voice can be strong, but it can also be silent and be the wind beneath the wings of every employee of the organization.
Great way to put it.
Noel, over to you.
Yeah, I think I just underscore what Amy said. What I found was that the CEO's role is really to underscore the importance of it, right? That in a lot of ways, the CEO is the chief strategy officer for the company. And so if in their articulation of what's critical to the success of the company, they include things like sustainability or DE&I or community impact, that really adds a tailwind to that work. And I always felt like it was the CSO's role to really deputize the company in service of the commitments that had been made, usually externally. And so that if the CSO is the sheriff in terms of deputizing the company, the CEO is whatever's above sheriff, right? They really give that stamp of approval. And so, as you mentioned, I think the relationship with the board is really important too. I was really fortunate to work for a company that had a corporate responsibility committee on its board for 2 decades or more. Frankly, even before I arrived at Nike 25 years ago. And so having the CEO there at those committee meetings, participating actively, engaging with the board on those topics is a bit of a tactical example, but a really, really important one too, because the interplay of governance between the CEO, the board of directors, the committee that's focused on that particular topic really creates a virtuous cycle of momentum for the topic itself.
That's very insightful. And I think the CEO underscoring the importance, as well as serving as the quasi chief strategy officer. I think that's what you hit on, the nail on the head, because someone who understands the strategy and integrating sustainability as part of that strategy, as opposed to a bolt-on, is critical. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going much better than I expected. So I will negotiate with the organizers to go a few minutes over, because this is a really rich discussion, and this is a rich discussion because of several factors. But the key factor here is we have a collective aggregation of over 60 to 70 years of experience sitting on this panel. This is not typical. I repeat, this is very atypical of sustainability officers or heads of ESG, because typically the field is in its nascency, and we are just starting out. So you don't have that breadth and depth of experience along with business experience that people can bring to the table and share good practices. A very quick response on my follow-up question. It's a bolt-on to the dynamic between the CEO and CSO, as well as the question about CSO and board. We have seen a lot of surveys, and surveys can be self-serving to some point, suggesting that the ideal reporting relationship for a chief sustainability officer ought to be to the CEO. And then some say CFO, and others might say general counsel, and I've seen the whole spectrum, right? And some would, in rare cases, say to the chief communications officer. In your opinion, what do you believe would be an effective and efficient reporting structure for the chief sustainability officer or ESG leader to have maximum impact? Noel.
Well, I'm a little bit biased because my role reported to the COO. And in a company like Nike, with such a huge operational footprint, that was really a very effective place for the role to report, because it had such a broad impact on carbon footprint and waste and all of the things that we were focused on. I mean, I do think that there's some merit in saying that the role should report to the CEO. There's some signaling that comes with that. It validates the importance of the role. It sends the message to the organization that this is a C-suite level role with C-suite level importance. So I completely agree with that. But I also understand that each organization has its own dynamics, and that depending on the state of the organization and what's important at that particular point in time, the CEO may not be the best place for it to report, given the bandwidth of the executive, whatever it may be. And so I really feel like, short of the CEO, at least in my experience, the operational leader of the company was a very good place for it to report for me.
The CEO, the person responsible for the operations.
Right.
That's a very fair point, and probably a more doable point in terms of practical implementation. Amy, here.
I think it really depends on the structure of the organization, the industry, the material issues to the material ESG issues to the company, et cetera. So I don't know that there's a one size fits all. Certainly, I agree with Noel that the CEO sends a signal when it sits there, but you also don't want this to be dictated down and cascaded just because the CEO says. It's our job to make the business case for this work and to bring people on board by influencing them, not by telling them the CEO says it has to be done, so you got to work with me. So I really do think it varies. I would say there's one watch out, and I've seen it more so happening now, reporting it to the CFO because of the regulatory landscape we're in, and that's where I report, and it's working very well. But as I said, I don't think it has to be everywhere the same way. But one watch out would be maybe the chief marketing officer. I think sometimes that signals that sustainability is part of the marketing strategy and not part of the business strategy, and the strategic offerings of the company. So it doesn't always mean that. It's not necessarily a bad place to be, only if it's considered a mouthpiece and not part of the strategy. It could be a watch out.
That's a very fine point you make about distinguishing between the marketing strategy and the business strategy, as opposed to being part of the overall fiber of the company. Carmen,
Sure.
would love to hear
Sure.
your view.
Well, it's interesting. At my last two companies where I've been in this kind of a role, we haven't had a COO type of a person. So we've reported into sort of the external affairs, corporate affairs, that kind of leadership position on the executive leadership team. So that's been actually fine, because I think the most important point is to what Amy was discussing just now about, if the position has the resources and the ability to kind of coordinate and do that dance and really influence the leadership in the way that the position needs to, then that is really what demonstrates the success. The CEO can talk about it, set the stage, the strategy, etc. Others have to kind of follow along, and it really, you need to be almost like a Pied Piper in the role, and you have to have the support of that executive team no matter where you sit. So I think it does sit in a lot of different places depending on the company, but I think the consistency of who is in the role and their ability to play that Pied Piper role is really important.
And I think getting people to follow you, over whom you may or may not have direct reporting authority, is a critical part of this role. And I still recall, I made a career transition, basically from strategy consulting and working in the financial sector and investment banking and oil and gas. And one of the key aspects that we felt, someone had asked me very early in my career in sustainability, what do you believe that a chief sustainability officer ought to be? And obviously, when you come from oil and gas and banking, you tend to simplify everything into a pie chart. The amount of oil that is above the ground versus under the ground, and that's a very simple pie chart. So I think if I recall right, the description that I drew was the person has to be 50% a business-centric professional, 25% a stakeholder engagement specialist who can partner with people, and 25% technical. Right? So the technical knowledge is not a large requirement as having a business-centered radar and an ability to bring people along collectively across borders, across functions, and across geographies. So this brings us very well into our next question. And it's a question that some of you have already touched at the beginning and have clearly diverse views on this. But there has been a lot of discussion, and we don't have to take this at last, because the question after that is something that we'll all enjoy. But there has been a lot of discussion that effective CSOs or effective ESG leaders are pretty much who work inside a business. It doesn't mean the business being a singular company, but inside industry, who have worked from the lines and then taken over a CSO function a little later in their career. How important do you believe it is for someone to have worked in a business role or function prior to performing their CSO role, as opposed to someone who's had a series of roles in sustainability from very early in their career? And Noel, I'll just, for the same order, I'll jump into you first, and then we'll just mix it up, Carmen and Amy.
Well, I think I tipped my hand early on, right? Obviously, I'm biased. I think that experience from within the business on the business side is really, really important. And I think even more so now, if we're, what I watched when I stepped into the CSO role in 2018 at Nike was kind of this huge explosion of aspirational commitments across all different sectors, not just footwear and apparel. Companies claiming they were going to be carbon positive, they were going to be climate positive, whatever that means, but without much substance in terms of how they're going to achieve those things. And obviously, Amy and Carmen both alluded to the regulatory changes that are happening really, really rapidly, especially in Europe, but really all over the world, that in a lot of ways will force companies to show their homework, to really show how you're going to do these things. And I think it's really difficult to show how you're going to do them if you don't understand how things get done in the company. And that's not to say that a sustainability professional can't learn those things in the same way that, speaking of myself, an operational professional can't learn sustainability. It's definitely a two-way street. But I really think that as an executive and a CSO, as an enterprise level executive, there's a tremendous amount of value in having fundamental experiences in different parts of the enterprise before you're put into a position where you're really charged with driving transformational change.
That's extremely helpful. Amy.
I think maybe Noel and I are going to duke it out because I come from the the other side of it. But I don't know if I actually am on one side or the other. I think it just goes back to what you were saying, Sunny, and I think what we've all been talking about is the ability to influence. Can you do that if you can speak the language of that person because you've been in the business and know how they run their particular area? Yes. Can you also do that because you understand sustainability, you know that lingo, and you know what it means, and you can explain a carbon credit like nobody's business? Yes, you could do that too. So I'm not sure if there's one way or another that's better. I think it's more about the attributes than it necessarily is about the experience because given the nascent nature of this field, there are so many people in it, especially those of us as veterans who have come to it in various different ways. And it'd be interesting to see research, but I'm not so sure you could pinpoint one or the other. And the last thing I'll say about it is, the ability to influence. I just wanted to sow a seed in terms of what I believe is the sort of the way to go about that, the secret sauce in terms of influencing is being able to speak the language of the person that you're talking to. Because I don't talk about sustainability to the head of HR in the same way I do to the head of risk, for instance. Sustainability can be embedded in those areas and many others, but the lens is quite different. So to me, that's the secret sauce about influencing people who don't report to you and the managers with whom you need their teams to do work with your teams is really being able to say, here's what sustainability means to your group. And this is how I'm suggesting we go about it. And we're here to help.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the ability to speak the language of sustainability in a simple, concise, and a relevant manner that people can relate to is what makes probably change in any area, much less sustainability, happen. But people have a buy-in or a vested interest. Carmen, would love for you to be the tipping point because we've got two people on both sides.
Well, interestingly enough, I was going to say I think I'm probably somewhere in the center, or maybe I could serve as the referee. I don't know. But what I would say is actually I think it's a little bit of both, right? I do think that having that wisdom of experience is really important because you are influencing, so as Amy was saying, so many different actors in different ways. How you approach them, yet really bringing that language of sustainability or responsibility all the way through is so important. At the same time, because it is such a nascent field, it may have been helpful in my career journey had there been courses or a degree or some kind of something on ESG, sustainability, responsibility. There are more of those now, and I do think we see people entering the workforce with some of that background. However, I would still say that I think even with that background, how you interact, how you manage the politics inside of a company, how you speak to the chief medical officer versus the chief marketing officer, which in my case are both CMOs and very confusing, is really important. So, you have to be able to adjust, adapt quickly. And some of that really does come with the breadth of knowledge and experience needed to do that dance I keep referring to.
No, this is very critical, Carmen. I'm running a little tight on time, ladies and gentlemen, so I'm going to jump into this next question. And then I have two more, but we can be pretty quick about those. The monetization and financial impact of ESG has been a discussion as long as the field has been around. And from a good to have and a nice to have, we have clearly transitioned to a have to have, right? And when you look at a have to have of monetizing impact, it becomes a challenging matter for people who are not used to have to justify their budgets in that manner. But it seems only reasonable that if you have a seat at the boardroom table, that one has to meet a certain hurdle rate to contribute to the overall growth and value and profitability of the company. Can each of you, starting with Amy, comment on a single sustainability solution that you have participated in, been part of, designed, developed, been part of a team that has actually resulted in delivering financial impact? And when I say financial impact, it could be anything ranging from revenue enhancement to even cost containment to mitigating risk, which has a financial impact, enhancing reputation, increasing the valuation. So the definition is very broad, but it is quite tangible. Amy.
Yes, it's a tough one to just choose one. I would say, and the cost avoidance is interesting because you don't know exactly how many dollars you're avoiding by mitigating risk. So I might just talk about process, and that we didn't have an actual monetary number, but if you are just general examples, if you are screening your supply chain and your screen raises the fact that there's a potential supplier that is mining on indigenous land and you decide to say no, you're avoiding the reputational risk that could come from that, shareholder proposals, et cetera, that could come from that reputational damage, et cetera. What the monetary value of that is, we'd have to do the research, but it's just an example of some of the ways we're looking at sustainability, especially in the financial industry, when you're looking at who you're loaning to, who you're investing in, et cetera. It's a lot of the risk mitigation piece and the cost avoidance. And then, as we all know, the easy one is generally when you decrease your energy use, you're also going to decrease the cost around purchasing energy. If you're purchasing energy as part of 10, 20, 30-year agreements, you're generally saving costs down the road within those agreements. So those are two quick examples.
So very, very valid, and they do have a cost differential associated to them. Carmen, may I request you to come up with something in your rich and illustrious story?
Sure. I mean, what I tell people all the time is, listen, if our business is not successful, then we are not going to be successful. And the same is true the other way around, I think. Again, my sector is a little bit different, and we talk about healthcare all the time and access therein. And one of the things we had great successes with was thinking about how to market responsibly as it pertains to health equity. And we saw in just some pilots or sort of marketing demonstrations that if you did targeted marketing in a way that was very culturally sensitive and appropriate, you could actually see, and this was in the vaccine world, you could see an increase of 5-to-1 in your ROI, because all of a sudden you're talking to a group of people in a way that they understand that they can advocate for themselves when they see their providers, that they can be true and responsible to themselves, and understanding the need for something that you don't always think you need, because we're talking about a vaccine, a preventive healthcare. So I think that there is a way to do this, that the street or the company or your leadership is not always patient to give you the space to make that happen in a way. But if we don't do that, then we aren't going to be able to invest in, all the things we need to be successful in our business, whether it be carbon credits, whether it be, whatever it is that we're trying to do otherwise to show that we are invested in the space and being responsible companies, then, we're not going to be successful. So we have to figure out a way to do both and to balance, because in my world anyway, it's very much a circular kind of operation.
Well, that's helpful. Noel, we'll have you wrap this up.
Sure. I've got two quick examples. First and foremost, a very tactical example. So when I was early in my tenure at CSO at Nike, the European logistics team took it upon themselves to resize all of the boxes that were used to send out digital orders across Europe. This was driven by two things, really. The motivation to ship less air, which of course lowers the carbon footprint per unit. It also saves costs. And it was a significant amount of cost for them. So that was really one of the first examples where I went, oh yeah, okay, it's the one, what's in it for me, but it's also in the loftier description, the intersection of incentive, where the team understood that had both a profit motive and a sustainability motive. And so that kind of lives on in my memory as a really good example in the operations space where those things can come together very quickly. In my own personal experience in Vietnam in particular, I managed 13 factories that made a lot of Nike footwear. And one of the things that I found was in those relationships, the general managers of those factories who were very deliberate, thoughtful, sophisticated about the way that they approached what we now call ESG, the way that they engaged their workforce, how they managed their waste streams, how they interacted with their communities. That was a signal as to whether or not they would be good partners in the future. Were they innovative? Could they metabolize growth? Were they thoughtful? Were they bringing us ideas? And so I really think that maybe a less tactical, does this provide an ROI standpoint, and more of a window into the capability of your partners, that for me was a real eye-opener. That their approach to that topic was an indicator as to their level of sophistication, their ability to grow with us over time.
I've just been listening to all these examples, and they are very useful examples. And Noel, you don't miss a moment to slip in, no pun intended, ship less air. Right? Right. So, how cool could that be for the next commercial for Nike? Ship less air and obviously recycling boxes. It all adds up. It all adds up.
Hey, Sunny, can I just say something on Noel's last point? The one thing we haven't talked so much about is partnership. And I think who you partner with and how you run your business is so important, right? And ensuring, and we see a lot of this when we think about, our carbon footprint and what's happening with scopes and 1, 2, and 3, et cetera. But I do think that having responsible partners, not only to the environment and their operations, but to the employees that they engage and work with, the vendors that they work with, all of that is so important. So I just want to put a fine point on that last point that Noel made, which is the partners that you engage with, the suppliers, all of the agencies, et cetera. It's really important that they too are on the same level as you are in how you think about these critical issues.
Partnerships are critical, and believe me, partnerships could be entirely a panel in itself, or the content we could cover on that one. This is truly, and we're not done. There are two rather key questions, but we have covered the gamut of a lot of stuff that they don't teach you in the top business schools, right? The dynamic of the relationship between CEOs and the board. Who should one report to? What are the attributes and the skills? Examples of monetary or financial impact. All of these are very useful, practical, concrete examples of how companies can become more successful and effective, not to mention efficient, with their programs. Which brings me to a question that, given the fact that all of you have had amazing careers and you are still going strong, and may you continue to do so, as sustainability becomes further integrated into the process DNA of companies, okay? And the only analogy that I can think of is the analogy of e-commerce, which I use all the time. In the late 90s and early 2000s, e-commerce was a big wave. and consulting firms capitalized on this to make enormous amounts of money with Y2K and everything else. They actually were e-commerce czars, right? There was a person who was in charge of e-commerce. Then we had e-commerce departments, and today e-commerce has become commerce. This is the way we are broadcasting to you right now. This is the way we wrote in our emails. This is the way we use our phones. And Carmen has been a real trooper because her rather elaborate system broke down, and she's actually coming to us via her cell phone. So when you talk about transitions in phases, given the way the ESG agenda is moving forward, do you believe personally that if things go well and things go along the way they're going, that most of you would not have a job in the next 3 to 5 years because your jobs have become a part of the company? I really am too afraid to say I'm going to start the first one. You can either flip a coin or raise your hand. And Amy, I guess, did I see sounds of silence, or was there a sound of consent that you would like to take this one?
And
I'm happy to. I was laughing. I didn't raise my hand, but I'm happy to take it first. It's a good question, and I have heard some people when they speak say my goal is to eliminate my job down the road. I'm not so sure that will be the case, but it's possible. I think that what we're experiencing now is a very rapid evolution. The regulatory landscape coming up, new positions. There's now ESG lawyers. There's sustainability comps. There's an ESG controller. There's responsible procurement position. I do think that there will be a need for a while, and maybe forever, for a team and a lead to still pull those groups together and still centralize the idea behind a sustainability strategy, even while it's embedded and even while there are people embedded in different areas. I do think there'll probably still be a need for that convening piece of it.
That's a very key point. Someone to connect the dots and bring it all together, and that's not going to go away. Noel.
Yeah, I really agree with Amy. I think, well, if we use the example of e-commerce, in most companies, there still is a leader for digital commerce. And so I think that there's, whether it's 25% technical or less or more than that in the CSO's portfolio, I think you will always need somebody to guide that strategy. Will it become more integrated? No question. That was really kind of the mantra that I used in the 5 years that I was CSO at Nike, was really to drive integration so that the major functions of the company were really operationalizing the things that we had committed to. So deeper level of integration, absolutely. But I still think for the foreseeable future, you'll need someone to guide that strategy at an well.
Carmen.
Yeah, I would agree with my esteemed panelists. I would also say that, and I would add the accountability piece. You know, it's not only leading and coordinating and sort of setting that bigger strategy. I think it's also holding ourselves accountable. And we're moving towards, you know, I think a path where measures and reporting requirements and all these things are coming into play, which is good. But my experience, I mean, if you've ever raised children, you know that they never stop learning. They never stop coming to you for help. You know, even when they're having their own children and they're, you know, raising their own family. So I do think that having that guidepost there, that leader, that strategic thinker is always going to be important to bring all these pieces together at the enterprise level.
No, it's great that we have all come together in unison and saying that this role cannot disappear. In fact, it's going to get bigger. So, which actually brings us to the final round of questions, which is a rapid fire round. And I think this round is very important because it gets our viewers and our practitioners, as well as our research and academic community, to get to know you a little bit more on a human or a personal side. I'm going to ask you two questions, and on each question, I'll go around the room This time I'll go alphabetically. So, Noel, sorry, pal. You're getting stuck with several firsts. And my first question to you, all three of you, starting with Noel, next is Amy, and then is Carmen, in that order. And then we will shuffle the order. What is your favorite movie of all time?
Yeah.
And why?
Jeez. I even had advance notice for this question. I still didn't look at the answer. I'll just give you my gut reaction. It is Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. Maybe it's nostalgia that drives that, but it's still my favorite Star Wars movie, and I'm still a bit of a sci-fi geek, so I'll leave it at that.
That's great. Amy.
There are so many, and it depends on your mood for the type of movie it feels like. But I one of my top favorites is The Princess Bride. And I think I love it because there's some intrigue, there's a love affair, there's revenge, there's kind of the underdog winning. There's a lot of comedy. You laugh throughout it. So I think that's why I like it.
Great choice.
That's a great answer. and Disney will love you. Wasn't it? I don't know if it was a Disney movie, but come on.
I never will forget, Amy. I went to see The Princess Bride. I'm not going to say how old I was at the time, but this will age me. They were handing out for everybody that bought tickets to go see it this little 45 record of one of the songs from The Princess Bride, which forever became one of my favorite movies and songs also. But I'm going to let you have that one. I am. I would say I love The Usual Suspects. I love how it is so all over the place with all these little stories and people and characters involved. And then at the end, it all comes together and kind of whacks you in the head, but just in a good way.
No, but what is so evident in your selections, both nostalgia but also positive outcomes and looking forward, and I think that is very necessary in the world we live in. Which brings me to the next question that I have, and I was going to ask you about your favorite foods, but I already know Carmen's answer and Amy's answer is going to be champagne, and that doesn't count as a food. So I'm going to skip that question and throw a curveball to you. Your favorite city in the whole world and why? Amy.
Another tough one, but I'll just go with New York since I'm in it. But also, I always wanted to live here and move here. My family's originally from here. I came here growing up every year for vacations, and it was not easy to adjust to this place. But now I've earned my badge 20 plus. I think I'm going on 30 years actually. And I do feel like there's no place like it. And it has its difficulties, but I love it. And when I'm flying home and I look out the plane window and I see all the buildings, I just smile.
Well, that's a great answer, Amy. And I am not supposed to weigh into this question with my own favorite, but I think, as you and Mr. Sinatra said, a city so great that they had to name it twice, New York, New York. Right? So, but I can clearly see it's not a shared opinion. Carmen, over to you. From San Francisco, Carmen.
Yes, I mean, I am in San Francisco and would probably say that is the most readily available answer in my mind. However, I would like to answer officially as Cape Town. Wow. I think. Yeah, it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, with some of the most beautiful people, with delicious food and wonderful wine, by the way.
The Western Cape is renowned.
Yes, but also so much rich history to learn from, I think, good, bad, otherwise, and the way that the city and the country has continues to come out of that and reinvent itself and just create this rich future for itself.
From New York to the Western Cape and the provinces of French Hook and wine tasting, Where will Noel take us?
My gut reaction is to say Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. But even after living there for 3 years, I don't think that I can do the heat and humidity for much longer. So as much as I would love that to be number one, I'm going to have to go with Paris. There's just something about that city that I've fallen in love with, and don't get there nearly as often as I would like, but it's definitely my favorite city.
No, that's a great answer, and also it's to your Gaelic heritage, Noel, that you chose Paris. Surprise, surprise. Look, all I can say is I probably enjoyed myself more in this session than you guys have, because whether it was from question one right down from New York to Cape Town to Saigon to Paris and Princess Bride, I mean, you couldn't have a more diverse, broader, and deeper conversation, and a genuine and honest conversation. Okay, and that's why I'm so grateful to the three of you. You've given us so much to choose from. In terms of the content, this is going to be wonderfully edited by Jonah Films for us, and under the leadership of Dr. Peter Easton, this is also going to make it to one of the most leading and fast emerging quarterlies, specifically in the area of sustainability, called Accountability in a Sustainable World Quarterly Journal. Okay? And you're going to see this, and obviously you're going to comment on it before we wrap up. I could end up with so many wonderful quotes. Shipping less air, to speaking the language of sustainability, fueling the intersections of incentive, okay? Not being a CEO, not being the face of sustainability, but the voice of sustainability. CEO being the chief strategy officer, and that sets up the tone. The concept of how do you lead across the enterprise and have a macro view? Humility. Okay, very important. Okay, operational experience and transformation versus finding an ability to connect the dots. And most importantly, I can conclude with a certain degree of success at the end of this session to say the CEO role is alive and well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and long live the CSO. And with that, I bid you adieu, and good evening, good morning, or good night, wherever you are. Thank you so much.